So for several weeks now, we have been talking about a strong possibility of seeing a war in the Caribbean. And whenever we do programs about this and talk about, bring update from what is going on with this so-called war on drugs, when we do updates on it, people, especially UNC supporters, would come out and say, look, you guys are fear-mongering and there's not going to be any war in the Caribbean. And the drugs from Venezuela affect Trinidad and Tobago more than anywhere else in the Caribbean. So while the other Caribbean leaders are talking about a zone of peace, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago have a right to support the Trump administration on this. And now we're seeing the possibility of war this year is getting more and more intense, because now yesterday we saw the arrival of the biggest warship in the world arriving in the Caribbean Sea.
The Pentagon today announced the USS Gerald Ford arrived in the Latin American region, part of President Trump's war on drug cartels. The Ford is the biggest aircraft carrier in the American fleet and has accompanying warships, far more firepower than needed to sink a few alleged drug smuggling boats. The target could be Venezuela. President Trump calls its authoritarian president, Nicolas Maduro, a narco-terrorist. Neighboring Colombia is also on edge.
Colombia is a drug den. It's a drug den, and it has been for a long time.
I met the chief of Colombia's elite counter-narcotics division. He was emphatic. His troops fight drug smugglers.
What do you think when people in the United States, critics, say that Colombia, your forces, aren't doing anything?
Every day, we continue to carry out intelligence, land, and air operations to combat this scourge of drug trafficking, he said.
The U.S. military strikes on boats allegedly carrying drugs heading for the United States is having a chilling effect on fishermen here in Colombia. Normally, these boats go far out to sea to find their catch. But now, fishermen tell us they're too afraid, worried that if they go far from the shore, they could be hit by a U.S. drone.
And with everything that is going on, you would think that the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, that she would come out and try to reassure the people of Trinidad and Tobago that they are doing their best for this not to escalate into a war. But the Prime Minister seemed to be one of the only people in the world that think that there's nothing going on in the Caribbean Sea. We're not going to have a war. And our latest was that this is just a rumor of war.
Some international media said that Trinidad and Tobago is a nation of fishermen. Nothing is further from the truth. We have fishermen, but we have other industries, we have other forms of income, and the pressure is being given that it's fishermen of Trinidad and Tobago being bombed out of the sea. What are you doing out there? Why are you so far out? Why don't you stay in your zone? Why don't you stay in TNT waters? And you'll be safe. Trinidad is not a target. Tobago is not a target. So I totally disagree with the narrative out there by some, that we're exposing our nationals to danger. As Farley said it earlier, there's war and there are rumors and rumors of war. There is no war. TNT is not a target. The targets are narco traffickers, gun runners.
And what is so interesting about this, that it seems like there's some Trinidadians that they're not getting the same message. They're not watching the same news that everyone else is watching, because they still continue to say that this is about fear-mongering and there's no possibility that Trinidad and Tobago could be impacted by any war in the Caribbean. And it is so crazy because I received a call recently from a friend that I have in India. And my friend called and said, yo, what is going on in the Caribbean? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And my friend sent me this clip that is showing in India about the possibility of a war in the Caribbean and how it could impact Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm saying to myself, if my friend can be in India, Goa, India, like thousands of miles away from the Caribbean and getting this news, why is it that people in Trinidad and Tobago are not getting the message?
Something big is happening in the Caribbean tonight. Trinidad and Tobago, a small island nation usually known for its beaches and carnival, has just placed its entire military on threat level 1. That's highest state of alert and the kind of usually declared only before war. According to the reports from Saturday Express, every soldier and Coast Guard officer in Trinidad and Tobago has been ordered to return to the base immediately. Bases in Kumoto, La Romaine, Chaguaramas and Long Circular are now fully on standby. Why? Because the alliance sources are warning of the possible regional instability as the tensions explode between the United States and Venezuela. For weeks now, Washington and Caracas have been locked in the dangerous standoff. The US has reportedly deployed warship aircraft carriers and even F-35 fighter jets across the Caribbean. Meanwhile, Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro is accusing the US of plotting a regime change. Now, here's where things get even more serious. Trinidad and Tobago sits right off Venezuela's coast, barely 11 kilometers away. If conflict breaks out, it would be one of the first countries to feel the impact. The government hasn't made any official statement yet, but sources suggest that alert was raised after US naval movements were detected near Venezuelan water. And that's why the island's military is now on high alert, monitoring skies, seas, and around the clock. This is extremely rare. Trinidad has maintained peaceful ties with both US and Venezuela for decades. For it to suddenly jump into the threat level 1 signals that officials are taking the threat to a wider confrontation and very seriously. Think about it. Just a few years ago, no one imagined a military face-off this close to home for millions in the Caribbean. But tonight, with US jets in the skies of Venezuela on the edge, the region is holding the breath. Even a small miscalculation happens and the Caribbean could find itself caught in the middle of the superpower clash. So what do you think? Is this just a military precaution, or are we really on the edge of the new crisis in the Americas?
And this would be probably the most unpopular war in our lifetime, because most Americans do not want this war. Not only Democrats, but Republicans are against this war. Only a few warheads that's in the Republican Party, like a Lindsey Graham, is pushing for this. But most Americans do not want their country, their government, to spend billions of dollars in another war.
We turn now to Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. He joins us from Seneca, South Carolina. Welcome back to Face the Nation. Senator,
thank you. Good morning.
On Friday, Defense Secretary Hegseth ordered the deployment of the Navy's most advanced aircraft carrier, the Gerald Ford, to Latin America. President Trump was asked if he planned to ask Congress for a declaration of war. You don't need an aircraft carrier to hit drug boats. Are land strikes planned?
Yeah, I think that's a real possibility. I think President Trump's made a decision that Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, is an indicted drug trafficker, that it's time for him to go, that Venezuela and Colombia have been safe havens for narco-terrorists for too long. And President Trump told me yesterday that he plans to brief members of Congress when he gets back from Asia about future potential military operations against Venezuela and Colombia. So there will be a congressional briefing about a potential expanding from the sea to the land. I support that idea, but I think he has all the authority he needs. Senator Gallego on another network accused President Trump and our military of committing murder by attacking these drug boats. To our men and women in uniform, you're not murdering anybody. You're making America safer by going after a narco-terrorist. You're following lawful orders. When President Bush 41 took Ortega out in Panama, Reagan went into Grenada to deal with the Cuban influence from Grenada in our backyard.
And because this war is so unpopular, Donald Trump is trying to get into a war without a declaration of war. And that is why they are trying to go find this loophole to attack Venezuela and to say that it's a war on drugs. Like if they go in, if they make land attack in Venezuela saying that it's a war on drugs, then they don't need Congress approval for a war, a declaration of war. And that is what the Trump administration is actively trying to do, because they know a declaration of war is not going to come, because they're not going to have the support from even Republicans but no Democrat is going to support this. So they are trying to find another loophole just to be able to invade Venezuela.
Urgent news. Donald Trump is getting ready to strike targets inside Venezuela, according to the Wall Street Journal and the Miami Herald. The United States Congress must speak up and stop this. No president, according to the Constitution, has the authority to strike another country without Congress's approval. And the American people have voted against regime change and endless wars. It is time for Congress to get back into session today and stop us from getting mired in yet another international conflict.
And even Tulsi Gabbard, who is on the Donald Trump team, she was a Democrat and she crossed over and she's now one of the closest person in the Trump circle. And even her know that, look, this is not about a war on drugs as people would want you to think. This is about regime change. Maduro must go.
The United States has a disastrous history of military intervention and regime change around the world, which has brought suffering to millions of people. It's bankrupted our country, dishonored our troops, and it's undermined our national security. We must end this policy now before we get into yet another military conflict, this time in Venezuela. Now, President Trump and his administration have already instituted heavy sanctions on Venezuela. They've doubled down on their position that all options are on the table. I wholeheartedly support the Venezuelan people as they fight for a free and fair democracy. But the United States should not be in the business of intervening, of picking who should lead their country, and we certainly should not be threatening military action. Venezuela poses no threat to the United States. Congress has not authorized the United States to go to war in Venezuela, and there's no justification for our country to violate the sovereignty of the Venezuelan people. Now, the reality is that threats of U.S. military action and regime change in Venezuela is undermining ongoing efforts to convince North Korea to give up their nuclear weapons program, which exists because Kim Jong-un sees it as the only deterrent against U.S.-led regime change. Now, President Trump is promising North Korea we will not wage regime change war against them, but at the same time is simultaneously threatening regime change in Venezuela.
And there's an old saying that when people show you who they are, that you should believe them, because Donald Trump said it over and over again that, look, they want the oil in Venezuela. And Venezuela, imagine 7% of drugs coming into America is going through Venezuela via Colombia. And America is not going to spend billions of dollars to go at war for 7% of drugs that is flowing through Venezuela. So everyone know that this has nothing to do with drugs. This is not a war of drugs. This is about regime change. This is about the Trump administration getting their hands on the world's biggest oil reserve.
Remember, Donald Trump is full. He's going to overthrow Venezuela. And the way they do it is they put sanctions on them. They try to wreck their economy. So people are, then they come in and they bring CIA money in and they give it to people and they go, overthrow the government. Here's some guns. Here's some weapons. Here's a lot of money. Overthrow the government. Then they install a puppet, and then the puppet turns over all their natural resources to the economic hitmen in the United States. And I know this is why Donald Trump is doing this with Venezuela, even though he's lying and saying it's about drugs, because that's a lie. Remember this, that says Trump says he's going to do land strikes. So he's not only is he bombing boats off of Venezuela, they're now going to start bombing inside Venezuela. Of course, they're going to bomb the land because that's where Venezuela keeps their oil. They don't keep it in the air. So and here, if you think I'm lying, here's Donald Trump when he was running for president telling you exactly why he cares about Venezuela.
How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door.
And so that's what they're doing now.
And what is interesting about this, unlike the Iraq war, you see a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservatives are calling out the Trump administration. A lot of MAGA supporters are split on this issue. Nobody wants this war. And I watch different news media in America. I follow some conservative and I follow some liberal news sources because I like to have a balanced view. And this is the first time I can recall that so many conservatives are against a conservative government trying to go at war. It wasn't difficult for them to go into Iraq and Afghanistan, but now we're seeing that this war could be the most unpopular war in our lifetime.
If you look at fentanyl, which by far is the worst drug entering the United States that kills the most people, it doesn't come from Venezuela. Nobody ever talked about Venezuela as the source of fentanyl. It was China and Mexico. The Trump campaign was talking about bombing the cartels in Mexico. It doesn't come from Venezuela. Cocaine, in some minority sense, I think it's 7 or 9%, according to government reports, passes through Venezuela, has to do with Venezuela, but it really comes from Colombia. And Colombia has been governed until a couple of years ago by right-wing governments that were close U.S. allies.
It's the first liberal president they've had ever. I think,
first left-wing president. Yeah. So, I mean, Trump's now saying, oh, it's his fault. Colombia has been the source of drugs, forever. All that iconography about Pablo Escobar and the Colombians and ever. This is a pretext. This is not, if you want to stop the flow of drugs, you have to close the borders, deal with the Mexican cartels. It has nothing to do with Venezuela. It's the WMD of the war. They want to change Maduro because they want a puppet government in Venezuela. Like they've, but it's not going to be that easy. We've been trying in Cuba for 7 decades to bring down that government. We've used all our might militarily, economically. We've suffocated that island like we're suffocating Venezuela. You can go and change the government of Venezuela if you want, but what is Venezuela doing to the United States? We've closed the border. Trump did succeed in doing that. There's no influx, or basically no influx anymore across the southern border. So the argument is not they're sending, drug cartels or immigrants to enter our country. And if you look at everything that has been said about fentanyl, which is what's killing people, it's not cocaine, it's fentanyl. It doesn't come from Venezuela. This is a disconnect. If you want to solve fentanyl, changing the government of Venezuela is irrelevant. And even if you did change the government of Venezuela, do you know the kind of instability you're going to have there? You think the drug cartels are going to disappear? Like I said, we controlled Colombia for decades with our alliance with the right-wing governments. It didn't stop. We helped in a civil war. You can't destroy the flow of drugs. The drug war doesn't work. What you have to do is, why is there so much demand in the United States for drugs? That is one crucial part of the equation.
So what is interesting, I look at the numbers, I think it's about 85,000 people, Americans, overdose in 2024. And that is way less than most things that's happening in America. Less than people dying from cancer, less than people dying in car accidents and stuff like that. And as I stated earlier, only 7% of drugs comes through Venezuela. Most of the drugs, up to 70%, of the drugs affecting Americans now are fentanyl, and fentanyl doesn't come from Venezuela, not from Colombia, and that is what the Trump administration is trying to convince people that, look, because of that 7% is why Venezuela should be invaded. And as I said, I'm happy to say that for the first time I'm seeing a lot of conservative, not just media, but as I said, MAGA supporters pushing back on this whole idea of a war on drugs with Venezuela, because the last time America went into a full-blown war with boots on the ground, they spent over $1 trillion, and that war lasts for 20 years. And just imagine, a war with Venezuela could mean China, could mean Russia, and this could be our worst nightmare.
5% of what they were a year ago, less than 5%. So now they're coming in by land, and even the land is concerned, because I told them that's going to be next. The land is going to be next. And we may go to the Senate, we may go to the, Congress and tell them about it, but I can't imagine they'd have any problem with it. I think, in fact, while we're here, I think it's a good idea, Pete. You go to Congress, you tell them about it. What are they going to do? Say, gee, we don't want to stop drugs pouring in? I don't see any Lawson going. No reason not to. They'll always complain, oh, we should have gone. So we're going to definitely, I'd like to just tell you, let's go. We'll go.
And Mr.
We're going to tell them what we're going to do, and I think they're going to probably like it, except for the radical left lunatics.
And Mr. President, if you are declaring war against these cartels and Congress is likely to approve of that process, why not just ask for a declaration of war?
Well, I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead. Okay.
The drugs aren't coming from Venezuela. We know this. So this is just an excuse. So obviously this is an excuse to try and enact a regime change against Maduro. Once again, they've been talking about this for a long time, trying to do it in a variety of different ways. This is just the latest method. It is instead to blow up a bunch of fishermen. Or maybe they are carton drugs around, but not here to America, and certainly not fentanyl. It would be cocaine, maybe other drugs, I don't know, but they're not coming all the way here to the United States from Venezuela in little fishing boats. We know this. So we also know that this is really just about something else. This is about really toppling Maduro.
And if you're watching from Trinidad and Tobago and you think that us being against this war in the Caribbean is us being against Trinidad and Tobago, I would say you better wake up and smell the coffee. Nobody is against Trinidad and Tobago. Most of us that are putting out these information that are against this war, we actually love Trinidad and Tobago. We want Trinidad and Tobago to be that Trinidad and Tobago that we know where we can come and we can go to Carnival and we can experience the warmth and the love from some of the nicest people in the world. As I've stated over and over again, I have not met one Trinidadian in person that I don't like. I believe that Trinidadians are some of the most fun-loving people, the life of the party, and the type of people that you want to be your friends. And just the idea of a war that could impact our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago, this is why we're talking about it. This has nothing to do with politics. Like, me talking about this is not about UNC or PNM. Like, I criticize PNM, I'll criticize UNC if they're doing something that I don't like. And I just believe that, like, Trinidad and Tobago should not be forced to be in the middle of this. We understand the whole situation with Guyana and the fact that Guyana is so quiet. The President Ali of Guyana is so quiet. President Ali of Guyana continues to vote on the zone of peace. This is just not a good thing for Trinidad and Tobago. So guys, sound off in the comment section and let me know your thoughts on this one. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing content. And remember, peace. I'm out.